Disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not represent any employer or entity. The information shared is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or used in any legal capacity, including establishing standards of care. All efforts have been made to comply with HIPAA regulations. No guarantees are made regarding the accuracy of statements or opinions provided. Interaction with the podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please enjoy this podcast responsibly.
All right, welcome into the first episode of Pod Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dykes.
And Dr. Leland Jaffe.
Why did we start this podcast?
Yeah, well, again, I'm excited to launch this podcast. It's been a lot of effort in the making, and excited to see where this goes. But our goal, and at least in the number of conversations we've had together, is really just to create a platform to inspire, educate, have some fun along the way, bring our audience into this podcast. I think, really trying to build a community where we can learn and grow together and hopefully have some fun along the way. But, you and I both work with different institutions. So being involved in academics already, I think, gives us somewhat of an advantage. And hopefully we'll be able to use some of those skills and, incorporate it into this medium here.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of our listeners will probably know who we are, either one or both of us. That may be how they stumble onto the podcast. But just as a background, why don't you kind of give us a little history of who you are, where you come from, and how you ended up where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Leland Jaffe. So I'm a graduate of Scholl College. So I went to Scholl straight out of undergrad.
Just kidding.
So I Midwesterner at heart. So my family all originated from the New York area. So all my roots are tied to Long Island, Coney Island, and Brooklyn. That's where my dad and mom came from originally. But then they moved out to the Midwest in the late 70s, which is where I was born, just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. So I was born and raised there. So without boring the audience too much about my life story, I went into this profession shortly after undergrad. So again, I didn't have any gap year. I went right into it. And I knew for me personally, medicine was something I was always interested in. It's kind of funny. I took the GRE years later. A lot of us in medicine, including myself, took the MCAT going into, medical education.
Right.
And I've always been really good at sciences and maths and really struggled at history and reading and language and writing. But It's funny. So I took the GRE years later because I thought I was going to do a PhD. In fact, I was going to do a PhD shortly before I was getting ready to apply February of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And it really put the kibosh on that goal. But the point I'm trying to make is I took the GRE and my strongest subjects were actually writing, my writing sample. That was my crowning achievement ever. So not sure how I got too far onto that tangent, but
that helped you formulate your website and now what you're doing with that. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, you're exactly right. I mean, medical writing and just writing in general has been a good creative outlet. So, I created the website really because I felt...
So it's higherlearninghub.com.
Yeah, higherlearninghub.com. So initially... social media for me was kind of a foreign concept. Really didn't know much about it. Didn't really want to be involved with it. In fact, my wife is still one of the last few humans on Earth without a Facebook account, and she's standing firm, right? So she will not see her on Facebook or any other social media. Sure. So for me, it was kind of funny. I started an Instagram account when I moved into the office of clerkship and residency placement, really as a way to celebrate our match day party. Because our school at the time didn't have any robust social media presence. And so I wanted to have some outlet to be able to really celebrate the students during match day. And so that was kind of the origination of my Instagram account.
Sure. And so
Yeah.
you obviously work with students. How do you think that your training has kind of optimized you for working with students? Because you didn't jump into academics right away.
A little bit. So my first job when I was down in St. Louis, Missouri. So after I graduated my residency in Chicago, Illinois, I went to a residency at St. Joseph Hospital, as well as I spent 1 year at a DVA in North Chicago. But after I graduated, I worked in a private practice setting for about 4.5 years or so before I moved back to Shoal College, and it was kind of an interesting experience because day one of my practice down in St. Louis, I immediately started working with residents from the SSM DePaul residency program. So they would
Mhm.
scrub my surgical cases. I didn't have a big role with the residency right out of the gate, but they certainly covered just about all the surgical cases I had. So I had that immediate role reversal and being in that
Mm.
educator, mentor type role really from the get go. So it wasn't, a true academic role in the sense like I am now, but it did give me that taste, if you will, of being in that role.
Yeah, you hit the ground running. That's
Yeah.
hard. Step one, you
Yeah.
haven't even figured out what you want to do, how you want to fix something, and how to work up a patient on your own. And all of a sudden, someone's asking you questions.
Oh,
I had
absolutely.
that. So just to jump back a little bit, and then we'll kind of bring this full circle. I'm Dr. Jeff Dykes in Central Iowa. I work for the largest multi-specialty group here in Iowa, physician-owned, building surgery center. So, and my wife works for Des Moines University. So through that avenue, I work with students as well. I did residency in Pittsburgh at the Good Pittsburgh program. Again, just kidding. No offense to West Penn, but I went to University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. My wife and I matched there together. Then we both joined separate orthopedic groups down in Tennessee, kind of randomly on a whim. Ended up moving down there and loved it. But
Did you have any
eventually
family in
moved.
Tennessee at the time, or did you know anyone in that area?
Nope, no affiliation whatsoever. There was a
All right.
recruiter who I was talking to about a different job, and they said, "Hey, would you like to look into a job that I have available in outside Knoxville, Tennessee?" And I said, "Nope, no, thank you." And he said, "Well, why don't you just go down and visit, see what it's all about?" And went down, loved it, worked there for 4 years, and had a great time. But eventually wanted to move back to the Midwest, Iowa, be close to family. I'm from Des Moines originally, so
So
I do
do you
work
consider
with
Tennessee the Midwest, or is that South?
that South. That is
That's South.
South.
Okay.
Oh yeah, y'all, bless his heart.
All
South.
right. All
Yeah.
right. I think same thing with
So
Missouri. I mean, St. Louis and Kansas City are kind of bubbles in Missouri, but I'd say
sure.
Missouri. Yeah.
It's funny because every state dislikes the one beneath them. It seems like we don't like Missouri, but Missouri probably doesn't like Arkansas. But Minnesota hates us. So
Yeah. I think
I
Missouri
don't
and
know what it
Kansas
is.
probably are more the rivals. So I
Yeah, I
don't
bet
know.
you're
For
right.
them, it's a little bit more west of them.
Sure, but I also hate Nebraska. So equal
Okay.
opportunity hatred
Okay.
there, mostly sports based. So I do work with the students at the school. So that kind of ties our stories together. And that's kind of actually how we met. So similar to you, I created a social media account called FootDoc Duo on Instagram and started posting some educational and trying to be somewhat entertaining, put an entertaining spin on education. It can get obviously rather dry and boring uh, sometimes. So trying to put a entertaining spin on that. And that's actually how we crossed paths. So you were on another podcast called Dean's Chat. Shout out to Dean's Chat and Dr. Jensen. Everyone go listen to Dean's Chat. And I was impressed with you on there. And I thought, wow, he is well spoken. And I thought he would make a good partner on the podcast. So I reached out through those social media avenues. And that's how this came to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dr. Jensen's doing a great job for the profession. I was able to meet him actually a couple weeks ago down in Tampa at ACFAS, and as genuine as a nice person as he was on camera too. So definitely a shout out to them.
For sure. So there's some inspiration there for us and some other podcasts, but we envision this as being somewhat different. So we're going to be a little maybe more edgy, a little more entertaining, hopefully, and do a little more visual spin. So our goal is to have on some interesting guests and go through some cases with x-rays and maybe some surgical videos and really um, dive down into the pearls and pitfalls of those cases from the surgeon's perspective. I think that's one thing that is lacking. When you go to a conference, they tend to put up their best x-rays and their success stories, which is great, but it's not the real world. We all have complications. We all deal with complicated patients, and not everything always goes exactly according to plan.
I was going to say my good story. My first case out of residency was I did a Lapidus and a couple hammer toes on a patient. And this is just kind of goes to show you the Missouri clientele is week 1 or week 2, her cam boot got stomped on by a horse. So it just completely blew up the fixation. And that was my first case without an attending. And I'm like, surgery sucks. I'm not doing this
to the real world. Welcome to the real world. Yeah, it's your problem now.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
As we kind of move forward through this podcast, I think that we're going to do some entertaining things. I hope we're going to do some trivia questions. So tell us about how you help formulate those trivia questions from your website and from what you do on your day job.
Yeah. So for those that aren't aware, I do post daily quizzes on the website. They originally were on Instagram, so I would do daily quizzes on my personal Instagram account. The problem I ran into eventually was I had very little ability to elaborate and explain when I'm in class with students and when I'm in clinic. It's definitely fine to get things wrong. In fact, it's no problem whatsoever, and it's actually really helpful because then you can go through why it's an incorrect answer and how to redirect that thought process. And I didn't have that ability to do it on Instagram, so I moved that over to the website, and the website allows me to elaborate on explanations. I also have a number of cheat sheets that are just kind of high yield information that people can download. But the way that what inspires those questions is truly either cases of my own. So basically things that I've been asked or things that I've experienced in clinic or in the operating room or in the classroom, if you will. And if I'm really stuck and I'm trying to come up with the topic and I've got writer's block, I will truly go down the AACPM curricular guideline, find a learning objective that I'm not sure about, go read about it on UpToDate, and then write a question. So for those of you preparing for your Part 2 board exam that's more clinically based, hopefully you'll find that helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So it's stuff you need to know, right? Yeah. So, but for those wondering, I don't take these test questions because they're way too hard for me. I fix bones. I take broken bones and I put them back together and hopefully they stay there. But I will not get any of those questions correct. So for those in the younger stages, this will be very helpful.
Yeah. So for those that are curious, because I've been asked a few times that people are scared to answer them, I don't even see who answers what. So feel free to get them wrong. No worries, no stress on that end.
Yeah, you're lying, and then you'll see mine and be like,
"Yeah, right.
I knew he was an idiot." So good. Those are good questions for people to answer, and we're going to kind of involve some of those in our podcast and kind of talk through some of those things because it's a little, it's easy to kind of lose track of things when you start following along online with surgical cases and you think surgery. And I think when the students come to rotate with me, they're so surgical focused. And I think I was as well. When you're looking at residency programs, how much surgery do they do? Surgery. Well, you get out into the real world, and you do a lot of surgery, but not as much as you think, right? You have to be able to work up a patient in the clinic, see them, be a human, interact with them, understand that they're having a real problem. That's why they came to you. They're not just an x-ray. They're not just a lab value. They're having a real problem. Be able to socially interact with them, gather their story, formulate a plan, and work through that together. And if you don't really know the understanding behind what you're doing, if you know how to do a Lapidus, but you don't really know why you're doing a Lapidus, that can be a problem, right? So I think that's important. And so that's where some of these other trivia questions may come into play to kind of keep a broader spectrum of what we do every day, because it's stuff that's easy to forget, to be honest with you.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think something that you said that resonates with me is the non-surgical side of podiatry, because and really just more of what you alluded to is just those interpersonal skills, being able to be a good communicator. Especially as a newer practitioner. I think, we're probably similar along our career paths in terms of how many years we've been out, but I'm sure all of us have, those first couple of years in a practice, a number of patients will tell you, are you old enough to be my doctor? Or I have grandchildren older than you, or, we've all heard that before. And it's really important, I think, to be able to exude confidence in your decision making process so that they feel comfortable and confident with what you're discussing with them. And that's challenging. I had a patient last week that came to see me that was a second opinion from another provider at the hospital I work that, and I know this person is only a year or two into practice, and they were not questioning their decision making, but really just wanted reassurance that it was the appropriate recommendation. And I know this person well, and they made an absolutely appropriate assessment and recommendation. But that can be a little bit harder as a newer practitioner and surgeon.
Oh, I send for second opinion all day long. Most of the time, I hope they don't come back. But
fair enough.
If I'm stumped, I'm like, all right, I'm out. Somebody else figure this out. But I'll send for second opinions all day long. Even when I started out, I had a good friend that I made down in Tennessee, Dr. Des Moines, and we would send second opinions back and forth. And it was very helpful just to make sure, okay, am I on the right track here? Am I doing the right thing? And sometimes yes, and sometimes there's a helpful kind of, would you think about that? Or what about that?
Sure.
And that is really helpful. So
I think that goes along to just knowing your limits too. What are you good at? And what can you get reproducible results with? And what's a little bit outside of your skill set? Right. I mean, and for me personally, first thing that comes to my mind is I work in a big multidisciplinary wound care center, but I am not skilled in doing orthoplastics, for example. But I have some good friends and colleagues in the Chicagoland area that do it much more frequently than I would. So again, that would be an appropriate person to send for a second opinion. That would be a good topic just for an entire episode. The second opinion.
I think that's hard. Exactly. And I think that's hard for new graduates to know what they don't know, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. Right. So it's okay to admit, you know what, this isn't my field of expertise. This isn't in my wheelhouse, maybe ever, or at least right now. I'm going to send you to someone who can help you. And that's kind of hard because there is kind of maybe a stigma or maybe an ego thing behind that where people don't want to admit that they can't do something or they don't know. But I do that all the time. I think that's very reasonable to incorporate a team of people. I think it's important to, as you make friends in your community, sometimes you view them as competition, and maybe they are, but they can also be friends, second opinion sources, and team members that work together for the patient. I think that's ultimately what medicine should be, and sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. If you have a team with infectious disease and vascular surgery and orthopedics and all the above, internal medicine, family practice, all the above working together, I think that's in the best interest of the patient. So you're not on an island, and so reaching out to people for help, I think, is very reasonable.
I always ask myself, would I want myself to perform this on myself? And if the answer is no, then I usually ask for help.
That's
my golden rule.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Know your limitations. So
exactly.
Let's talk through kind of, both of us obviously are podiatrists. We do foot and ankle surgery. We do the things that come along with foot and ankle surgery, both operative and non-operative. So let's talk through kind of what is a podiatrist. We're probably going to have some listeners, hopefully eventually, that are listening to this that are stumbling across podiatry and not really sure what the heck is going on. So I'm going to kind of go through some things that encompasses podiatry, and I'll have you kind of touch on those as we go. So I'm just going to kind of read them off because it's an all-encompassing list, but then we'll kind of spin off into kind of a little more detail. So biomechanics, surgery, dermatology, neurology, plastic surgery, orthopedics, vascular, radiology, and pathology. So it's a little interesting that we treat a certain body part. We don't treat necessarily, just the vasculature of the foot or just the neurological system of the foot. We treat the entire foot, all of those things. So we have to be experts, quote unquote, in all of those areas of medicine. So do you find that to be the case in your practice?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll even kind of step back one step further. And for those that aren't aware, podiatrists go to a 4-year degree post college, or if you go into a master's or whatnot, but it's a 4-year program. And then after the 4-year program, all of our residencies have essentially standardized now to a 36-month residency. And I was impressed this year at ACFAS, which is our national scientific conference, of how many fellowships are available now too, because those really didn't exist when I graduated residency. And I always tell the residents, I'm jealous. Like their opportunities now are significantly supersede what I had when I graduated. So, and that's really what you want to see. You want to see the profession moving in that direction.
Exactly.
So really, we're doing at least 7 years post college of training to treat the whole patient, but then really focusing on our specialty, which is the lower extremity and specifically the foot and ankle when it comes to surgery. But to answer your question, absolutely. The foot is a component, obviously, of the entire body, and the foot is impacted by diseases and by things that happen systemically throughout the body. A good example is, and we always talk about it. You mentioned vascular. So if we're assessing somebody's vascular circulation in the lower extremity, and we take an X-ray of the ankle or the foot, and we see calcified arteries that are like railroad tracks going all the way to the digits, you better believe that there's going to be some calcification in the coronary arteries and the carotid arteries and the renal arteries and throughout the entire body. So it really, again, is just a window into the patient's systemic health as well too. So yeah, on any given day, we have our dermatology hat on. Often, I mean, that's the first thing that we assess in most of our patients. We have to be good at biomechanics and assessing the pathomechanics that lead to certain deformities. Some of us are traumatologists, where we work in different trauma centers, treating open fractures, closed fractures, and other types of high energy, low energy injuries of the lower extremity. And then, bread and butter elective surgery too, which comes in on a daily basis as well too. So it's always interesting if you're in a full day of clinic, to have a patient that's coming in with something as simple as an ingrown nail, and then the next patient's coming in with this pediatric deformity, just on complete opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of its complexity. But really, we see such a wide breadth of conditions and age ranges of patients too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So, in my clinic, I'll see anywhere from 40 to 50 patients in a day. And I think it's interesting because it keeps you kind of engaged in the patient. It's not just one thing over and over and over again. But it means that you have to be well versed in everything. Like you said, pediatric deformities, neurological deformities, assessing the vasculature. Okay, where's the root cause of their issue? Is it something simple we can fix? We need to dig a little deeper. Do we need to order some advanced imaging? Do we need to involve another specialty, neurology, whatever it may be? But I think that's one of the benefits of podiatry, is that it kind of has so much variety that it is constantly changing, and no two patients are the same. I'll see, 3 Jones fracture, 5th metatarsal base fractures in a row. They'll all be a little bit different. The mechanism is different. The fracture pattern is different. The patient's morphology, the curvature of the bone, the underlying, do they smoke? Do they have vitamin D deficiency? Do they have a cavovarus foot that's overloading the 5th metatarsal? And there was a stress component to that. So even things that seem similar are not necessarily always the same. So I think that's interesting and kind of keeps us on our toes.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting that, to that same manner, you can have really the same pathology, and depending on where you trained, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, your approach to that problem could be very different as well too, which I think is interesting. There's definitely regional biases on how to handle certain situations.
It seems a little odd.
What's that?
It seems a little odd, right? You'd think there'd be the best way to do it, but I'm sure everyone.
But it's certainly true, though. You definitely see tendencies based on, I think, different regions, and
for sure.
being a product of your training, essentially.
Well, and I think people are, exactly what you said, a product of their training, right? So people who practice in a certain area are more likely to be a product of training in somewhat semi-similar geographic areas, and they're going to pass that on to the next generation. Whereas across the country, the same thing is true going on over there. Less likely for people to crisscross back and forth, but certainly does happen.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, do you want to zoom out a little bit and kind of finish our introductions of who we are outside of medicine?
Yeah, for sure. Take us through an average day of a day in the life.
Yeah. So I live in Chicago, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, just north. The college I work at is about an hour north of downtown Chicago. So I'm about halfway there because we go to the city quite often, and the school as well too. I'm married. I have two daughters. My oldest daughter is starting high school next year, which is alarming to me. I didn't realize I was old enough to have someone going into high school, but apparently I am.
Yeah, I feel that way too.
Yeah. And my youngest is turning 11, so we'll have a middle schooler and a high schooler. So we're definitely in that like quote unquote messy middle part of life where everybody's kind of pulling at your time strings, if you will. Being able to be time efficient and get the most out of those 24 hours we're all given is a skill that I'm still trying to master and get better at. Because it's challenging. I mean, my wife works full time as well too. So she works at a pharmaceutical company in Chicago called AbbVie. So she works. She's been working there really since 2020. She was one of the few that switched jobs at the very beginning of the pandemic, which is an interesting time to move into a new role. So her and I both work full time. So balancing two full-time jobs, two busy kids with a busy social life, much busier social life than I do. In fact, my daughters both stay up later than me on most nights now, which is kind of sad. So they're putting me to sleep now.
Tucking you in.
They're tucking me in. It's definitely a role reversal there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you stay busy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've definitely mastered more of the morning than the evening. I get most of my creative time in my blog posts, my medical writing. Like this morning, for example, I wrote a post at 6 a.m. when everyone's still sleeping in my house.
Peace and quiet.
Yeah, peace and quiet. Get my coffee going and get those creative juices flowing.
Yeah,
that's kind of my typical day. We're just busy, run, and really try to find some time in the middle to get some personal time, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. It's tough, but that's the journey, right? People have always said, you got to stop and enjoy the journey. What are you running towards, right? Mm-hmm. These are the moments with your kids. These are the moments with your patients. This is the life, right? So it's easy to kind of let it go by in a blur and keep worrying about the next thing. But I think that's to enjoy the journey is important.
Yeah, definitely. Days are long, weeks are short, years are shorter. I mean, that's a cliche, but it's definitely true. For sure. Again, I'm going to turn around and my oldest is going to be heading off to college. Although she reminds me daily of when she's starting to drive, because apparently she thinks she's inheriting my Wrangler. So apparently I'm losing my car. Yeah.
Good deal for her.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, she's about 1 year from starting to drive, which terrifies me. So anyone that lives in my area, watch out. It could be dangerous out here in about a year.
For sure. The older I get, I think the younger the people I see driving are. No way that she's 12. No way that person should be driving. I go the other way.
100%. We've got a couple new drivers on my street, and it's pretty wild.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm in a similar situation. Married, two young boys, 9 and 7. So we stay busy as well. My wife teaches at Des Moines University. So I make the joke. So I work in private practice, multi-specialty clinic, and she works at the school. So I say that I make twice as much money and she works twice as hard. So that's not far off. She is constantly doing things and staying insanely busy. So I can fully appreciate your job with all of the components of trying to balance all that stuff is harder even than what I do. So hats off to you, because I know that job. I have to live with someone in that situation. So hats off to you guys who do go into academia, because it's not necessarily something that everyone strives for. I don't know anyone in school that was like, oh, I want to come back and work at the school, right? It's not necessarily, oh, I want to go work in an ortho group or a multi-specialty group, or I want to, do lots of surgery. So, but I think boots on the ground, you're the ones that are making the difference every day. You're the ones that are teaching the next generation of people that would become doctors. I tell my wife that I might change patients' lives one at a time, but you're, by nature of teaching these students, changing an exponentially higher number of lives by teaching them the correct thing and how to be a doctor and how to not only do what they do, but do it well. So hats off to you for that. I think that's admirable.
I appreciate that. And it was interesting when I moved from private practice into an academic role. One of the people that interviewed me at the university, I remember this question. It was one of the best questions I asked, and kind of what you alluded to a little bit earlier. But they said, "Are you are you running towards something or running away from something? And it was definitely running towards something because I was at a crossroads in my career where I wanted more involvement with the residency program that I alluded to, but I really didn't have a pathway to get there in the practice I was in. So, for me, timing was everything. I was really in the right place at the right time in Chicago when I was notified of a vacancy at the college, and it was definitely not something I was actively seeking. It really kind of sought me out in a way, but it's really been an amazing 9+ years that I've been there. The relationships I have with the students and my colleagues and such are really what make it a special place to be. But I'll tell you, you really don't realize how well you have to know something until you have to teach others. Because that first year, when I'm creating all new lectures and new content, man, that was a difficult year. And that's actually part of the motivation of the website I'm creating, because a lot of the content that I publish on there is really how to be an educator. Because no one teaches you when you join a university how to write learning objectives. How do you write a rubric? How do you write a good exam? Right?
Yeah.
How do you formulate a syllabi or syllabus, I should say? And those are really difficult skills sometimes to master. And I wouldn't even say I'm a master yet, but I'm definitely getting more experienced in that domain. But that's part of the motivation too, is to create a platform where people can come together and really share best practices as it relates to education.
I think it's very difficult to write good questions, right? Because you can write a good question that's too hard. You can write a good question that's too easy, but writing a good question that, is not too hard, too easy, makes people think. It's very difficult. You sit down and you try to do it, and it's either going to be too easy or it's going to be you're trying too hard to make it hard. And by nature, then it's too hard and nobody gets it correct, right? So it's really hard to find that balance.
Yeah, no, it is. But it's definitely and even more than just writing one question, writing an entire exam where it's fair, but it's challenging, but it's assessing your learning objectives efficiently. And it essentially rewards students for coming prepared and knowing the information, right? That's what you're trying to achieve. I remember the first exams I used to administer almost 10 years ago. I was almost as nervous about the outcome than the students.
Yeah.
Because I wanted this test to test well. I wanted it to perform well, where the statistics would validate myself in terms of I'm teaching them, and these learning objectives are coming through clearly to them. It's an interesting role, but
it is for sure. So as we move forward through this podcast, kind of what do you envision as we move on from episode to episode? We have some guests lined up that I think people are going to really enjoy. Experts, you might say. Going to have them go through some of their cases, but our goal is also to reach out and do cross specialty involvement as well, vascular surgery and infectious disease and orthopedics and all the components of medicine here. So
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think between you and I, we have experience working with graduate students at DMU and at Scholl College, right? We have experience working with the resident level as well too. We have experience working independently, outside of the university as well. You were down in Tennessee. I was down in Missouri, so we can kind of speak to that as well too. So definitely, and we definitely practice. Everyone practices much more in a very interprofessional nature, where we're collaborating with other specialties. So I think bringing them in to not only educate us about their specialty, but really educate them about the role that the podiatrist plays in the healthcare field, I think is something that is important too to me in terms of using this platform to educate the general public about the role of the modern day DPM in the healthcare field, if you will, right? Because there are, one thing that we've noticed when we do outreach to universities, and I should say undergraduate universities, is sometimes there's just a lack of awareness. Not only of students, but even healthcare advisors, for example, might not have a good way to describe what a podiatrist does in 2024. So I think even just being able to help them answer that question for prospective students is something I hope to be able to achieve also through this.
And I think you brought up a good point there. I think with our experience both in private practice, orthopedics, academia, and multi-specialty, we kind of have we have all the areas covered, I think, with our experience level. And so I think also diving into things like contract negotiation, expected salaries, residency match,
Sure.
all the other
Where'd you
details that
learn your
come along with
practice
things.
management? Did you learn practice management in your residency?
Yeah, we had private practice rotations, but again, if you could go back and do it all over again, you'd pay way more attention to those than you did during surgery, right? You kind of felt like, oh man, I got this. I got to go spend some time over here, and really, you get out in the real world, and you're like, oh man, I should have, really focused on that a lot more. Because I remember I started my practice down in Tennessee, and I was like, all right, got my first patient. Here we go.
Right.
Worked them up. Here we go. I know what to do. And then they said, all right, when do you want to see me back? And I kind of sat there and I thought, I don't know, whenever you want to come back and see me, with couple weeks, month, whatever whatever you want to do is fine. Yeah. What do you want? When are you free? Because I'll be free. When are you free? So I think that takes some of that is just going to happen on the job, right?
Yeah.
But I think you and I having that experience is going to give some advice to these younger people and maybe whoever is listening. Of we've been there, we've been doing that for a while now, and can provide some of that information. I think that'll be helpful as well. So not only on the academic side, but in the real world side.
100%. Yeah. When I first went into practice, my first year and a half or so, we still used ICD-9 codes. So I was about a year in. I'm finally getting reimbursed for my claims that I'm submitting to insurance, and then all of a sudden they blew that up with ICD-10. So I think it went from 7,000-8,000 codes to 70 or 80,000 or something like that.
Unbelievable.
And also, what's interesting is I don't know what year you started practicing. We can go into that, but my first job, we started without EMR. So I was charting by hand or by just typing a note on my PC.
Nah, I must be a lot younger than you. I must be.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm
younger.
dating myself or not, but and I also like a little rotary phone. No.
No, yeah, we had EMR, but it went through a bunch of different iterations. We had an iPad-based one that was kind of touch-based. That sounds good in theory. That didn't end up being very good, and I don't know. There's a lot of practice management stuff that I'm sure we'll delve into as the podcasts go on.
I think a lot of people would appreciate that, and there's definitely content experts out there that could probably provide insight also into non-traditional practices. I know there's a whole group of people that do more direct patient care where they even bypass insurance, and I'd love to learn more about that and how their model works in terms of them getting reimbursed.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, that's not going to work for everyone, but if it works for them, then so be it. That's great.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on this first episode of Pod Patrol. Leland, what can we expect moving forward from this podcast in terms of availability?
Yeah, so we're going to have weekly episodes that we anticipate launching. So you can anticipate one episode a week. We hope to have about 10 episodes in the first season. So, excited to have you along on this journey.
Stick with us, guys, as we kind of delve into the details of podiatry and medicine in general. We'll be back next time with some more cases and some interesting stories, I'm sure, to be had. So, signing off, it's Dr. Jeff Dykes
and Dr. Leland Jaffe.